Hey, welcome back to Avalon Integration's podcast series. This is Mike Kula talking to you. So we're 6 weeks into 2021. Seems like 2020 was a quick blur in the past. And today we got a lot in store for you. We're going to be talking about upcoming technology shifts in robotics. I'm joined by my colleagues, Anthony Grosso. Anthony, how are you?
Hey,
And
how
we
you
have our
doing, Mike?
doing well, Anthony. Good to see you. And we
Yep.
have our special guest speaker, Ritesh Gupta. Ritesh, how are you?
Very well, Mike. How are you?
Doing well, thanks.
Yeah,
Welcome and thanks for coming.
it's good to be back. Good to have you, Ritesh, on our podcast series. I've been looking forward to this conversation. You know, Mike, you and I have had several podcasts now. We've talked about several different topics and technologies. We've both been in the industry for quite some time, and we've seen some big changes. You know, especially we talked about our mobile computing platform and how it's evolved into the Android operating system and how that's come along. We've talked about RFID and how that's progressing. But you know, when I talk about all these different things, especially being in technology for this long, I'm always thinking about what's the next big thing, right? Whatever you're talking about. And you know, I have the privilege of working in a Zebra home office and having access to special folks like Ritesh who have the inside knowledge, and because for very good reason. Ritesh is part of our professional and learning services organization, and his charter as part of being strategic with regards to business development management is to be a big part of that product development, and to not only know the product, but also he has to design the education tools, not just for us Zebra resellers, but for partners like Avalon and our end user customers. And I know, Mike, over the years we've talked about, Avalon always being in the forefront of knowing the next technology and being trained on it. I know that's a big deal for you guys over to Avalon. So I'm wondering if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, it is. So we're real excited about what you guys are working on, and Ritesh, I'm really glad that you're here today with us. I remember back in 2017 when I sat in one of your presentations where you were discussing about how Android was going to become the mobile enterprise operating system. So I know you do a ton of product evangelism. So it sounds like now, since Android is here, and what you talked about back in 2017, we're firmly down that road. So now it seems like you're out working on robots and how that's going to influence the enterprise. And I know I got a little experience with robots, right? Obviously in the consumer space, we've seen the Roomba and all of these other things. And I actually recently saw one in my grocery store that just kind of drives around looking for spills on the floor. But one of the things I keep hearing, Ritesh, is the term robot or cobot. And I'm wondering if you can help me define that and kind of educate me on the market a little bit.
Absolutely, Mike. And it's my pleasure to be here, everyone. It's so exciting to talk about this topic of robotics and what robots are doing in the enterprise. So just to give a little bit of a background, when you think about robots, right, the first thing that comes to your mind is, the Polly's robot from Rocky the Fourth, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you remember
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
that, right? That you have this robot, which is there ready to serve everyone. Now, we are generally fascinated with robots because they are essentially reflections of ourselves. Ken Goldberg, an American writer, wrote that, especially when you look at the field of robotics and automation, people are looking at robots doing what they want to have as a mirror image of themselves. But when you think about the word robot, the first images that come to mind are the Hollywood humanoid characters. As I said, the robot from Rocky IV, or the Data from Star Trek. But today the word robot goes to describe any man-made machines that can perform tasks and other tasks that humans would be doing. Now, robots have been around working with us for a very long time, right? And they touch various parts of our lives, than we might even realize, right? So for instance, Think about your car, right? The industrial robots are the ones, which are actually welding the components that make up your car. Think about in healthcare, right? There are nursing robots, which provide support, especially to the elderly or people with disabilities to either sit down or stand up. There are elder care robots, which are used in quite a few different countries. Then also think about, there are robots, that put food on your table, or there are robot farmers. There are robots. Of course, we are all familiar with the Roomba, right? Which will come clean up your house. But there are also nano robots, right? The nano robots are these microscopic robots, which are designed to fit into extremely small places to perform a function, right? So these nanobots can essentially go into your bloodstream to perform, delicate surgical procedures, for instance, right? And so when you think about robots, they are all around us. Now, to your question specifically about cobots, cobots essentially stands for collaborative robots, and they are essentially picking up, more and more within our ecosystem. And that is specifically because we see that there is a much higher increase in demand from the retailers, which in turn leads to a much more speed of work, as well as worker activity from warehouses and suppliers and such. So we see these kinds of cobots, which are coming into play to essentially help out in augmenting that staff.
That's really interesting, Ritesh. Not to deviate from our enterprise discussion, but thinking of my personal life, being the father of 3 teenage daughters, I'm thinking I'm probably going to need one of those robots, right? To assist. Well, is it a robot or a cobot that will assist me in throwing the boys out of my house?
Well, Anthony, a cobot will do so collaboratively with you.
There you go.
Okay. I want to be involved in that process, so I think I'll get a cobot.
He'll do all the heavy lifting for you, Anthony.
It certainly will, right?
So, but in all seriousness, Ritesh, you touched on a couple of verticals, but how about in the manufacturing and warehousing spaces? How do those robots and cobots play?
Absolutely. So, Anthony, if we look at, an interesting pattern which is happening within our industry, and so let me draw attention to a couple of things, which are going on. So, according to Gartner, by 2021, there will be about $4 trillion of e-commerce sales that will be happening. We are all familiar, especially with COVID, that more and more people are doing e-commerce and online shopping. So what that has done is that it has accelerated expectations for the shoppers. So 89% of shoppers define now fast shipping within 2 days. This has now created an increased cost for transportation labor almost by 70%. So when you think about the cost for the supply chain, 70% of the cost is going towards transportation and labor. And we also know at the same time, there is an escalating labor shortages. So for example, again, this was a data from Gartner that 61% of logistics providers say that the shortages of labor adversely affect the quality of the product or specifically the service quality. Now, if you compound all of these things, specifically for warehouses or for supply chain, as we know that within a warehouse, order picking is the most critical time-consuming activities, right? As I just said that, it is about 60% of all work activities. And these are labor-intensive activities in a warehouse. And so now imagine that, specifically as these warehouses are getting bigger and larger, right? There is a demand and a need for a faster ability to process those orders that are coming in. And this is where the autonomous robots or autonomous cobots, are coming into play. Because if you think about in a warehouse, one of the root causes of a problem are that, you might send a delivery to a wrong recipient or a wrong quantity or a wrong product, right? Because of the picking errors, right? Those have detrimental effect on the service that the retailer is providing. Think about, a misshipment error because of a packaging or label error, right? Now, your products, Anthony, that was supposed to go to your place end up in my place, right?
Right.
That's not good. And so specifically now with the emphasis on accuracy and speed, there is a much more of an interest towards driving automation. And this is where robotics comes into play.
So what I hear you saying then, Ritesh, is robots or cobots. It's really focused on augmenting a lot of the repetitive work like picking and things like that to increase productivity, right?
Precisely. That's exactly right, Mike. So let me give a workflow example, for instance, right? If
Okay.
we are in a large warehouse, as the associate is walking around or as the picker is walking around picking locations, you can have a robot, which also sees the same order coming in from the WMS. Now
Hmm.
this cobot essentially navigates to the pick zone where the picker is. And as the picker identifies the item and picks up the item from the shelf, that picker basically places the item on the cobot. Now that cobot essentially takes that item and goes across the entire warehouse to the shipping zone, right? Or there is another cobot which is following that picker as the picker is finishing up the order. That cobot essentially picks up that takes that entire item, takes it over to the packing and shipping area, and now that item is gone. So if you think about distributing the duties or the roles and responsibilities of the picker and the
Hmm.
cobot, right? The one of the things that all I hear quite frequently is that the robots are going to replace humans and such. That is absolutely not the case, right? The humans are still very much in control here. Where the cobot, all it is doing is essentially enabling the worker to be a lot more effective and a lot more efficient.
Got it. Got it. So kind of like in Anthony's case with his daughter, Anthony can open the door and the cobot can throw him
Right,
out,
right.
That
right?
is
Got
But that
it.
cobot will always
exactly.
be there for me. It won't call in sick or, need healthcare coverage on my. Maybe I could claim him on my taxes. I don't know. I mean, it's it's
Yeah.
it's good stuff.
Well,
Go ahead, Mike.
no. So that's good point, Ritesh, because you're right. I mean, you look at in a warehouse situation with the picker, they do an awful lot of walking back and forth or driving on forklifts and things like that. So that ability of reducing the travel time allows them to really um, pick a lot more products, in a given shift than they otherwise would.
Absolutely. Now, when we talk about robotics, right, and one of the things, Mike, that comes about is that, look, what can we do with a robot, right? I mean, we talked about the business problem that the robot is solving, but robot in itself or a cobot in itself is not smart enough to be able to go do those tasks, right? That cobot has to be told what to do, right? And
Hmm.
specifically, if I look at the kinds of opportunities are there for our partners and for ISVs, I see three layers where our partners and ISVs can integrate their solution. So if you think about, at the very bottom layer, if you think about like a stack diagram, so at the very bottom layer is the actual hardware, right?
Hmm.
Now there are many different vendors, that provide hardware. I mean, if you were to even Google, you'll find lots of them that come across. So there is an ability to be able to create interfaces into those robots hardware level. The second level or second layer above that, think of it as a robot management system, which is able to process across and give instructions to each one of those robots as to what they must do. Where should they go? What kind of a process or what kinds of steps that they need to follow. And then if you think about the third layer of integration, that comes in towards integration between the backend solutions, specifically
Hmm.
such as the warehouse management systems. And I believe that is where really the big integration component comes into play, because this is where the task assignment or the automation really becomes much more relevant into the performance and the automation of what the store is looking for. So imagine the task assignment or the process automation or even the order processing from the WMS. those pieces now become that interface that comes into the robot management system, which then ultimately goes into the hardware, right? So if you think about those three layers, there is a tremendous amount of opportunities for the larger partner community to be able to interface and provide their solution in correlation with that.
It sounds like a new industry can emerge from this. You mentioned warehouse management systems. Now you potentially will have a robot management system industry. Is that what I'm hearing? Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So Anthony, if you think about even at the hardware level, so at the robot level, yes, there are components around deployment and operations and monitoring and maintenance and, disposal and those kinds of things, right? But if we go one level up within the stack, right, which is where now we start to add intelligence into that robot, and then go one more level up, which is where now we have really truly added the automation and combine that with artificial intelligence. Now think about, I see patterns, and based on a pattern that I am able to dictate what my robot needs to go do. Let me give an example, right? So consider that I'm in a grocery store environment, and as my point of sale checkout terminal detects that that there was a bottle of soda that was just sold, it can essentially tell the warehouse management system that, look, we need to bring in a bottle of soda across into the front. Now that information can then be parsed across over all the way down to the cobot level. So next time then there is a delivery that is coming into that particular retailer, an additional bottle of soda is loaded up on that particular pallet. Now, I'm of course simplifying this entire process, but you can imagine that the cobot then ultimately just becomes another helper to that associate, and it can bring that level of intelligence in real time.
Great, Ritesh. Great. Actually, I have a couple of questions on the manufacturing side, but I think before we get into that, let's take a quick break for a message from our sponsors.
With Avalon Integration, you don't have to bring outdated technologies into your modernized future. Upgrade your legacy devices through the Go Zebra trade-in program to integrate Zebra's next generation of enterprise hardware in your operations, all while getting cash rebates towards your upgrade. Contact Avalon to get started.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. So really great conversation about robots and cobots. I get how the robots are more independent, and the cobots actually can complete a whole task. You guys know I'm a car buff. I love the whole manufacturing space around the automotive industry. And, I think about Tesla and how, they've automated a lot of the manufacturing on their end. Ritesh, specifically around that space, and, how do you see the cobots really leading the way in the manufacturing space?
Absolutely, Anthony. So, in manufacturing, cobots have been there, for a very long time, right? We've seen, specifically cobots, that are large arm-based cobots, that will do rather complicated and dangerous tasks, things like welding or formulating, the steel out for the particular car. Where we see the evolution going for the cobots is becoming even more involved in the manufacturing process, where the cobot essentially becomes an extension of what the worker is doing. So imagine that the cobot essentially becomes the extended arms of the worker who is almost sitting behind a computer and is able to construct the vehicle in the example that you were giving, right? Or, in fact, even think about in a very simplistic environment of like a follow me kind of a situation, where the cobot is essentially following the associate in the manufacturing process. So instead of the associate running throughout the factory floor looking for product or looking for item, the cobot is essentially doing that task. Now, there is also, other components that come along with the cobots. So for example, there is a robot swarming mechanism, right? In which case, the mobile robots detach themselves from the worker, and they can essentially go do the specific task and then bring that task to the worker. So imagine that if the associate is, in your example, is manufacturing a car, the robot or the cobot can essentially look ahead and see that, yes, you need a particular part, and it can go pick up that part from a particular part of the factory and bring it over to you,
Okay.
right? So that reduces the effort for the worker to essentially run around within the factory floor. And of course, it increases the efficiency at that point as well.
Yeah, definitely stops the line from, prevents the line from stopping, right?
Absolutely. Correct.
So great information, Ritesh. Let me shift the conversation in a little different direction. So, I remember, again, when Android was new in our industry and it seemed to take off a little slow. I remember, as I said, I heard your discussion back in 2017, and it seemed like 2018, 2019 was kind of that pivot point where it really started to get a lot of traction. Um, so when you look at that, Zebra's got such a commanding presence, right, in that Android space because you guys were first to market with that. What do you see as the ramp up time on this? I know you talked about the three levels on the stack thing where partners could participate, but this is obviously a lot harder than the Android operating system on a mobile computer.
Absolutely, Mike. That is very true. So, Zebra's vision when it comes to robotics and cobot is that, we see this as really a transformational journey for our customers. So if you think about, over time, and if anyone remembers RFID technology, right, and as RFID is becoming prevalent, there is much more data visibility and analytics, that are coming into play. If you think about, machine vision, that is becoming even more and more common on a daily basis, right?
Yep.
So add other locationing technologies, which are becoming much more mainstream. So as these burgeoning technologies become much more common and mainstream, the Zebra's vision comes together, especially from an automation perspective, is that this mechanism or this automation layer provides the ability to get access to the data or get access into the lower level visibility of where that particular information is or what the last mile delivery as well as the integration or deployment should look like. Now, this is where, if you think about, the three different pillars of intelligent automation that comes together. One pillar becomes the business process management, right? So this is about automation technology and operations and business processes and such that I mentioned earlier. Then the robotic process automation, which is again telling what the robot needs to do. But then the third layer, which is where the Zebra play is mostly happening, is the ability to combine AI along with what the physical automation tool set would do, right? So ultimately, we are basically just providing all of that data back across to each one of the different sources and each one of the different interfaces, rather, that can be consumed by our partners and again go across into integrations into the store operations or into the customer's backend systems.
Got it.
So interesting stuff. So now this makes me think about from our mutual customers' perspective, how ready is the market for this kind of technology, and what specifically for our customers, what do their technical resources need to be prepared for to adopt these kinds of technologies into their environments?
A great question. So look, if you think about, Anthony, some of the trends and patterns that we see. So for example, Amazon, there was a data point that Amazon provided that, on a typical Amazon order, the employee spends less than a minute, taking the item from the shelf, to box and ship it. Now, if we extend that, to the areas where we see automation and robotics become more prevalent, you think about robots in store operation, that is one big entity, and specifically around real-time inventory intelligence is becoming quite popular. We see the specifically with the click and collect fulfillment and to drive the associate productivity, that's a very, very strong growth area. The second piece that we see as a growth area is automation in warehouses, right? So you might have heard of a term called fully automated dock warehouses, right?
Yep.
And the idea there is that how can we enhance productivity, reduce the packaging errors, and lower the cost. Now, the third area where we also see the robotics come into play is, robots for customer support. So imagine that, personalized attention and wayfinding for knowing the customer and knowing what merchandise that they're looking for and guiding in that direction. Now, there are other industries and verticals where robotics is becoming very, very prevalent. And, this is recently specifically from COVID, where in healthcare, robots and cobots are becoming quite promising. So imagine that, from a telemedicine perspective, or in fact, even from the infection prevention perspective, that there is a robot or a cobot, which is able to go administer to the patient and also able to provide ability for the doctor to, or the healthcare provider to be able to see what the patient's condition is like. A robot or a cobot is a perfect example in that direction. We've also seen cobots coming into play from security perspective. Next time, if you're traveling and if you make your way to LaGuardia, you will see this robot which essentially roams around, and it's taking 360-degree view of all the people who are there. And again, just from doing facial recognition as well as from any threat detection perspective, that mechanism is there as well. So multiple different industries are growing into this direction. So to answer your question, I think the technology, while it is still in its infancy, I think it's going to expand and grow very rapidly. And the reason for that really is because the pressure that each one of these industries are seeing from the growth in e-commerce, the growth in requirement for driving efficiency and improvements in being able to fulfill orders accurately and increasing the worker productivity, all of those things are going to create this massive acceleration for automation and robotics.
Wow, pretty dynamic when you think about that, right, Ritesh? I mean, it's really going to impact our lives. I mean, probably a lot more for our kids than us, as we see it. But so let me ask another question. So, if I'm a manufacturer and I'm looking to gain efficiencies, and obviously we know about the technical challenges. We know it's in its infancy. What are the costs of a cobot or a robot? I mean, what do they range from? What would a client, think that, what type of investment are they looking at?
Sure. Great question, Mike. So, the hardware itself, or rather the robot or the cobot itself, that ranges in multiple different price points, right? I have seen, for example, cobots, which are chargeable as a per hour basis. So as if you were paying another associate's salary that you are paying
really
a cobot, right?
Okay.
So now, that'll be interesting to see if a cobot is getting paid minimum wage, right? But there is a model that I've seen, which allows to do that kind of a payment, as well as all the way to several thousands of dollars. I've also seen subscription model, that a cobot is just think of it as a hardware as a service kind of a mechanism that, you are paying for the number of transactions or the number of journeys that cobot is doing, or imagine how many processes or tasks that cobot is doing, right? Now, in each one of the different models, the interesting thing to recognize is the business value that over time, these cobots, are able to provide a positive ROI, right? And again, when we look at the different customers who are implementing these cobots or these robots within their ecosystem, they are essentially benefiting from the ability to get that enhanced productivity, right? And by doing that reduction in errors, by doing that reduction in worker failures, or even in the loss of worker, you have now this cobot, which is able to provide that ROI very, very rapidly.
I think the return on investments on something like this is going to be huge compared to other kinds of investments that these large enterprises are making.
Well, yeah, especially with today's labor market, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of our customers, when you ask them what's their one of their biggest problems, especially during this COVID, it's getting labor,
right?
And getting people in there to do that job. So they are definitely looking to improve that process the best that they can.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you especially think about, peak time fulfillment, flexibility, and scalability, a cobot becomes a very nice collaboration tool for that associate, right? And again, I want to reemphasize on that, right? The cobot or the robot is not here to replace the human, right? This is in collaboration along with the associate, right? The robots in themselves are not smart enough that they can take over that entire task, right? And I hear this as a very big social concern that look, robots are going to take over jobs. Unfortunately, they are not that smart enough.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Yeah, go back to my example with my daughters. I mean, I would never want to be replaced by a cobot or a robot, but having that assistance and being able to tell it where and when to throw them out the window or throw them out the front door. I mean, that's important to me. So this has been good stuff. I do have one last question though, and I'm sure Mike is interested in this also. When I think about as a channel manager and thinking about our partner ecosystem and the technologies that our partners are really good at selling already, like mobile computing and AIDC and even RFID, where do we see these technologies being integrated into the robots and the cobots, or will they be integrated where a partner like Avalon Integration can provide an even bigger solution to a customer down the road?
Absolutely. So Anthony, if you think about just from an RFID perspective, right? The fact that there are over 10 billion RFID tags out in the market at this point, those are just getting more and more prevalent in locationing technologies, for instance, right? That location is what dictates, where the cobot goes or where the particular assets are available. If you think about, the locationing technologies, which are there to essentially identify the particular area where the robot should go, that again becomes a very good scalable component, for our partners to play with. Add on to this, the rugged high-performing mobile computers and tablets that Zebra provide. Now that essentially goes into the hands of the associates, which also can collaborate along with the robot, right? So the information that the cobot gets, that's the same exact information that the associate is getting. So imagine that as a worker, I get an order, or I know that there is an order coming towards me. The cobot also sees that order is coming towards Ritesh, and it can actually already start moving in my direction or already go in the direction, where the order has to be picked up from. And so if you think about, the opportunity for our partners is essentially quite extensive because, some of the solutions that they are already implementing, some of these root solutions around RFID or mobile computing, they are already just going to get expanded even beyond. And they are the raw ingredients in making the cobots smart, right? Because it's a culmination of all of these different technologies that ultimately is giving the action for that cobot or that robot to perform and fulfill. Now, another interesting thing that comes together in this entire journey here is that we must think about the end-to-end process and ecosystem in mind, right? Because if we were to look at only one small piece of it, then we might miss the entire larger picture, right? And this is where my recommendation to our partners and and our extended teams is to look at what problem that we are solving for the customer, because we all have our individual pieces of the puzzle. So be it the automation aspect around the data, right? We've heard a lot about intelligent automation around, and we hear buzz around artificial intelligence to pull the data analytics, but that in itself is not sufficient. That has to be compounded together with what we do out of those patterns and give that visibility across into the operations of that warehouse. That can be correlated with RFID technologies or mobile computing technologies. Then that information that goes out to the cobots to essentially be able to embed into this entire ecosystem. So what my point here is that the cobot in itself is not the end game. The entire chain of events is what really makes this entire solution comes together.
Yeah, it's really just one cog of a giant machine, right?
That's exactly right. And I think that's where the opportunities for growth for our partners come in, right? Because if you expand your thought process beyond just one cog, right? You look at the entire picture, you can easily add additional components, to get to that ultimate productivity and enhancement.
Absolutely.
Really good stuff. I know all of my questions have been answered. We talked about the cobots versus the robots. We talked about the different market conditions and the cost, technical challenges, how it's going to integrate into our partner ecosystem. I don't know, Mike, if you have any final thoughts or questions or comments.
No, I'm real excited, Ritesh. I again really appreciate you coming on and spending time with us. I always enjoy having a conversation with you, and I'm gonna put my money down that we're gonna see this coming sooner rather than later.
Absolutely, yeah. Mike and Anthony, the future is bright, especially when I look at the next evolution for our enterprise technologies. This opens up new doors, for our partners. It enables our customers to think differently as well. If you think about, the waves of technology that have happened over the years, right? We went through the first wave of technology, which was system of records, to the second wave of technology, which was more around social media, social engagement. This wave of technology is really about looking at all of the different components and things and bringing them all together into being able to provide a solution that is dynamic and ultimately provides the best efficiency for our customers.
Very cool.
Very good stuff. Well, I know after this call, I'm going to be calling my tax accountant to see when and if I can claim a cobot dependent on my tax return. But for now, we'll absorb this, and it's really good information to think about in the future. So I appreciate you, Ritesh, joining us for this conversation. And Mike, I always appreciate talking to you.
Absolutely.
On these podcasts, and I look forward to the next one. And
sounds good.
Thank you both. My pleasure.
All right, guys. See you later.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.